The calendar may say late July, but the Philadelphia Flyers have been very busy lately. The Columbus Blue Jackets have a new coach and some controversy about a potential star player maybe being on the move. And the Dallas Stars have made a lot of moves, but are they better than they were a year ago? We've got all that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs are in the rearview mirror, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. It is my pleasure to welcome into the show my usual Friday co-host and co-host of Locked On Flyers, Rachel Donner. And Rachel, it's been a busy summer for the Philadelphia Flyers, just at the time when most teams are sort of settling down.
Yeah, it's been interesting. There really wasn't much of significance for the Flyers to do this summer, but they did stuff of significance anyway. Of course, I think the first thing is that first round draft pick from 2023, Matvei Michkov, suddenly became available to come over this year as opposed to 2 years down the road, which is per his original KHL contract. That's what we thought was happening. So this past week, of course, he came over. They had a big introductory press conference for him. He had signed his ELC and everything. So he is going to be a Philadelphia Flyer this upcoming season.
Now, what impact do you expect him to have, and how soon do you think he'll have an impact?
I think the Flyers are being very, very smart about this because he's 19 and he's coming over earlier than expected. They are doing a lot of work to try and temper expectations for him. He's got a lot to learn to make the transition to the NHL game from the KHL. And, he's got a lot of raw talent and skill. Obviously, he wouldn't have gone top 10 otherwise. And of course, I think many people think he dropped at least a few spots in that draft just because of the availability issue, which is now moot. So I think it remains to be seen. But I know he has high expectations for himself, and the team is just doing the best they can to help him adjust. And I think that, we just got to give him a little bit of time, but the skill is absolutely there to make something happen. Whether it happens right away, we'll see.
Does he start the season in the NHL, or do you think the AHL?
100% in the NHL. They would not have done all of this for him to play in the AHL.
And what role do you expect him to start off with, and then maybe where does it go from there?
Yeah, I think if I were John Tortorella, I would put him as a third line winger to start off with, and then see if he can move up in the lineup just to give him a little bit more sheltered ice time. And ramp it up as he gets more adjusted. In theory, I think he'll net out at a second line winger for the season, but I would start him at that third line wing.
And what are some of the things that he needs to work on to really be more effective in the NHL?
He has not a solid defensive game, let's say. And that's been like the big ding on him. And John Tortorella, as we know, is known for having a two-way game, and he expects all of his players to play a two-way game and block shots and be strong defensively. So I think that is going to be his first assignment when he comes to camp, is really learning that system and how he can fit into it and building those skills.
And that wasn't the only big move that the Flyers made. They signed Travis Konecny to a big extension. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because this upcoming season was set to be a contract year for Konecny. No longer the case because he signed that extension. So it doesn't kick in until the following year, that 8-year deal. And it is, as we said on the Friday show, it's the biggest deal that the Flyers have ever officially signed, aside from that offer sheet ways back. But I think that he has solidified himself as a core member of this team even before this deal was signed, and he is currently with that extension signed through 2033. So he is a long-term part of this team, and they plan to have him be a core part of this team for the future. And I think an 8-year deal is pretty standard these days for guys like Konecny, and to get him to be paid a little bit less per season, you have to give it to him, and that's what they did, and we'll see how it turns out for the team. But as for the player himself, huge part of the team, a really prolific scorer, but also an energy guy. And I think that that is the essence of the Philadelphia Flyers. And so I think it's a good thing to have him stick around.
How old will he be when the contract ends?
36.
Okay, so not terribly old, but sort of a little bit past his
Getting
prime.
up there as hockey players go.
So these two big moves, how much better are the Flyers heading into this season as compared to the end of last year?
Yeah, it's interesting because when all is said and done, there aren't really a ton of roster changes between last year and this year. I would say, one of the bigger things that we saw at the end of last season was Ivan Fedotov becoming the backup to Sam Ersson in net. And that is a question mark about whether that goalie tandem is going to work out for the Flyers. And so I think that there are some questions there, but of the forwards, there was really nobody that had to be re-signed except for a couple of RFAs. They re-signed all the RFAs pretty quickly. And so that roster is pretty much staying the same. And there isn't, going to be much of a battle at camp, presumably. I mean, things could always change, but I think, it's a pretty similar team other than Michkov. I think that is going to be an X factor, and the goaltending is going to be an X factor, and then whether the blue line can hold up.
Yeah, the blue line always an issue in recent years. So here we are, a couple of months away from the start of the season and training camp. What still needs to be figured out for the Philadelphia Flyers at this point in time in the summer?
Yeah, like I said, not much to figure out. There is one-ish forward spot ostensibly open going into the season. And right now, you pencil in Ryan Johansson, who was brought to the Flyers last year in a trade deadline deal, but he's been injured and hasn't played. And we just don't know yet what his injury status is and if he'll be able to play. So if he's healthy and can play, he will likely get that last roster spot. But if not, it's up for grabs. But literally everything else is spoken for already on the roster, unless something absolutely nuts happens at camp. So not a lot of drama, we hope, at camp this year.
And if he doesn't get that last roster spot, who are some of the candidates who could?
So Ali Lixel is a forward that spent a bunch of time with the Flyers this past season, but primarily played for the Phantoms. And he's kind of been overlooked in a lot of ways, didn't really get quality ice time. He spent a lot of time in the press box, so it could be him. But they did also sign a couple of guys to two-way deals in the offseason that could compete depending on if they really think they want another center at the Flyers level. But again, we'll see what happens there.
All right, Rachel, I know you'll have all of this covered every step of the way. Why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you and your co-host on social media?
Sure. We are at Locked On Flyers on Twitter and Instagram for the show. And I'm our Miriam on Twitter. My lovely co-host Russ Cohen is at Sportsology everywhere on social media, and hope to see you there this season.
All right, Rachel, thanks so much. Always a pleasure, and see you on Friday.
See you Friday.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But with the NHL and NBA playoffs now in our rearview mirror, there are just fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. And look, you've got baseball season in full swing as they head into the second half of the season. The summer games in Paris are going on right now. And of course, you have football futures as training camps open up across the United States. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. That's FanDuel.com, FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. It is great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Blue Jackets, Jay Forster. And Jay, the Blue Jackets still busy. Here we are, toward the end of July, and over the weekend they make yet another signing. Why don't we start off talking about that?
Yeah, it's been a busy, I think, 8 or so weeks since the last time we talked. I believe we talked just after they hired the new GM, and since then, obviously, draft, free agency, new coach, RFAs are starting to get signed, which is great. Kent Johnson signed Saturday afternoon / morning-ish. I'm not sure about the time difference off the top of my head, but 3 years at $1.8 million, which is a way team-friendlier contract than I was expecting. Especially Johnson didn't have the best year, missed part of it due to injury, missed part of it due to being sent down to Cleveland. Never really kind of got anything going after a pretty darn good rookie season. I think he had 41 or 42 points in his rookie season, which, is not, on a miserable Blue Jackets team, is not nothing. By all accounts, he was going to get a 1-year contract, kind of a show me deal, go back to the negotiating table a year later, hopefully with a much better season under his belt. But the team has him under control for the next 3 years. And I believe it takes him to, I'm just going to double check here. It takes him to 1 season before becoming a UFA. So he's still under team control at the end of the deal, which is great. Again, the other thing about it being a team-friendly deal, which I just realized right this second, is it's not what I was expecting from a player who has Pat Brisson as his agent.
Yeah.
So very good work from Don Waddell to get him signed to a 3-year deal now, instead of, again, just kind of kicking the can down the road until next season.
Now, another thing that Don Waddell did, big news earlier this week, the Blue Jackets have a new head coach. Talk to me about the impact and how things may be different this year as a result.
So in the interest of full disclosure, Dean Evason was not my first pick or my second pick, really. But he is the guy that Don Waddell picked. And so, I've decided he is a GM that is known for making smart hires and hiring smart people and letting them do the work. He's really more of a supervisor than a manager, is kind of how I've had it explained to me, which is not a bad way to be. So I've decided that he probably knows who the best guy is. And, I've talked to a couple of people about it. I've talked to our wonderful colleague, Seth Topal, over at Locked On Wild about it. He had lots of things to say. And frankly, the Blue Jackets having an adult in charge is not the worst thing in the world. Right now, Evason has some experience. I think he's got about 260 regular season NHL games under his belt right now. He's got about a 600 or 639 win percentage in those regular season games, I believe. And the Blue Jackets, well, their last 3 coaches were Pascal Vincent, first-time head coach, technically Mike Babcock, which we won't even talk about that, and Brad Larson, another first-time NHL head coach. So, I think a lot of people hoping that Evason is going to bring back kind of the Tortorella days. I don't think that they are quite you can't map Evason onto Tortorella exactly, but there is going to be that structure. There is going to be that stability. I think there is going to be that accountability, which is something that Larson and Vincent both kind of preached in their tenure with Columbus, but never quite managed to kind of get that over the hump. So I'm really interested to see how Evason is going to do with this team, because it's a very different team than the Wild one that he coached quite well in the regular season. Everyone's making noise about how he doesn't know how to win in the playoffs. I'm like, okay, but what if we get to the playoffs first and then we'll figure out, then we'll worry about winning in the playoffs. This is not, Evason is not a long-term solution to this problem. I say problem with air quotes. He's not a long-term coaching solution here, I don't think. But he is a coach that's going to take the Blue Jackets from lottery pick to hopefully playoff team. If not, if they can win a round or two during Evason's hiring, like during Evason's tenure here, amazing. Right now, I'm looking for him to bring the team from bad to average. And then when we get to average, we'll worry about the next step.
Makes sense. Other news coming out recently, Patrik Laine out of the Players Assistance Program. He has demanded a trade. What have you been hearing, and what are the Blue Jackets looking for in return if they do deal Patrik Laine?
So I think the first, and I am probably 75% sure that Laine gets traded before the start of the season. However, his trade request came at a time when there was a new GM, an old GM in Jarmo Kekalainen. It was under the old head coach. The team was in a miserable position. Laine clearly wasn't in a good space, like emotionally. He went into the program very soon after that, after being injured. I'm not saying that he's going to come out of the program and rescind his trade request, but he's come out and said, he had said he wanted a fresh start. There's no reason that fresh start can't be with Columbus. It's going to look like a very different team to the one that he left in the middle of, I think it was December or early January, that he ended up getting injured and then went into the program very shortly after that. So he hasn't been around the team since early January. Lots of things are different. That being said, I still think the odds are he gets traded. I don't know where. I know Montreal is very interested. I know there's whispers that won't die about Winnipeg. There's a handful of other teams that have kind of made inclinations that they would like to try and acquire Laine. I believe the Islanders are one of those teams as well. I don't know that Patrik Laine is exactly what Lou Lamoriello was looking for, because he's under the age of 30. But it's a team name that I've heard out there. Now, in terms of what people or what the rumblings are that Blue Jackets want back, they always said they wanted a roster player. However, with the signing of Sean Monahan in free agency, which is something that, has happened in the past couple of weeks that we haven't even had a chance to get to, because so much has happened for the Blue Jackets in the last month or so. I believe that they have changed their ask from roster player to picks and prospects, picks or potentially picks or prospects, depending on both the pick and the prospect. So my guess is they'll get futures for Laine if he does move. I know, again, going back to Winnipeg, they have a very vocally unhappy prospect, all things, if we have to believe everything we hear in the media, which we probably shouldn't. I would do Patrik Laine for Rutger McGrorty straight up 1-for-1. Winnipeg probably isn't going to want to do that deal, but, there's some options out there. I wonder if, Montreal has a kind of a logjam of solid young defensemen. I don't know that the Blue Jackets necessarily want to add to their own logjam of young defensemen, but there are options there. So I am cautiously more optimistic for this return. I know people were talking about, things like Patrik Laine for Martin Necas 1-for-1. That's not a trade that I would make, because, again, it just kind of adds to the logjam, and especially since acquiring a guy like Sean Monahan, they've kind of solved, I'm going to knock on wood here, because the last time I said this, everything went horribly wrong. They've kind of solved that problem at center for now. If Sean Monahan can stay healthy, I'm going to knock on wood again, because my hockey psychic powers can only be used for evil. But there's lots out there. The Winnipeg one is kind of the best example that I can think of, but I wonder if, there are teams that offer a first-round pick and a lesser prospect, or a second-round pick and a B+, A- prospect. I know Toronto has Nick Robertson, who I don't think technically counts as a prospect anymore. He's reportedly unhappy in Toronto. I wonder if there's something that could be done there. So there's lots of moving parts still. And again, I wouldn't be surprised if it comes out that Patrik Laine is like, actually, now that I'm, and we don't know why he went to the program. No one has talked about it, and he is well within his right to keep that privacy. But I wonder if now that he's in a much better place, like mentally, emotionally, physically, I think people don't understand how much injuries weigh down on a person, especially someone like Patrik, who has been through a lot. He lost his father very suddenly a couple of years ago. And, I wouldn't be surprised if now that he's in a better place, he's like looking at Columbus and being like, actually, maybe I do want to stay here. So I still think he gets traded, but I won't be surprised if he is in a Blue Jackets jersey in October.
All right. Well, I know you'll keep an eye on that every step of the way. Jay, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Forster, JAKOBFORSTER. For the first time in a while, I do actually feel cautiously optimistic about recommending that people pay attention to the Blue Jackets. Normally I don't, which is usually my shtick when I come on this show and tell people not to pay attention to this team. But we might not be terrible this year. Another knock on wood, just for good measure. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets on Twitter. You can find it wherever you get Locked On NHL. We're on every podcasting app of choice. We are on YouTube. We're on Sirius XM, but you can find us wherever you get Locked On NHL. And the road to 1,000 subscribers continues for Locked On Blue Jackets.
Hope you get there soon, Jay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
It is great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Dallas Stars, Joey Erickson. And Joey, a lot of activity since July 1st around the Dallas Stars. Talk to me about some of the biggest losses and additions that Dallas has made.
Yeah, a lot of intriguing decisions were made by the Dallas Stars, especially on July 1st, after losing, of course, Chris Tanev, who was a big piece of last year's postseason run. Dallas was hoping to at least somehow replace him, but as well as you know, it is really hard to replace players like Chris Tanev. He was a great fit here in Dallas. Unfortunately, they were not going to be able to match what Toronto gave Chris Tanev. I don't think a lot of teams were going to be able to match what Toronto and Tanev ended up going with. So they had to find a way to kind of replace him by aggregate. And I think they missed out on a few of the big names like Matt Roy and Brandon Montour and even some others that were floated out there. And then all of a sudden they had to kind of go, I hate to use this term, but dumpster diving in a way. And they just had to go and grab some pieces. So they acquire Matt Dumba. They acquire Ilya Lyubushkin and Brendan Smith as well to kind of fill in the rest of the defensive core. And I think a lot of Stars fans feel like they took a step back from where they were at the Western Conference Final, and I would have to agree. So I'm really, really curious to see how the Stars get rolling here. They're still going to be a very good team, I think, but defensively, they don't scream contender in the West when you're thinking about getting over the hump. I still think they're a piece away. I think they're going to be a trade deadline away like they were a season ago. They're going to have to grab somebody else like a Tanev to really solidify that back end. But I'm still intrigued to see where it goes, because the one thing that these moves do for Dallas is maybe they give them some balance on the back end in terms of righties and lefties. Miro Heiskanen, as we know, has always played on his weak side for the majority of his career. Adding two right shot defensemen may give Pete DeBoer the opportunity to put Lyubushkin with Miro or even Matt Dumba. And now Miro can play on his strong side. And maybe that benefits the Stars more than we kind of realize, because he's been just so good on his off side. Maybe putting him on his strong side will really open up him offensively and open up the Stars a bit too. So I think the questions still lie in the defense. And we kind of talked about that all of last season. It's just a matter of, hey, can you get over the hump this time, because their window's pretty open right now.
Talk to me a little bit about the retirement of Joe Pavelski, what his loss will mean both on the ice and in the locker room.
Yeah, on the ice, I think advanced statistics and a lot of people would concur that it's addition by subtraction, because Father Time really caught up to Joe, especially in the postseason. He just wasn't quite himself. And I'm still talking about a 38-year-old that put up 65 points in the regular season. He was still very, very effective. So on ice, I think Dallas is going to still be as lethal up front, and that's due to some of their drafting over the past couple of years. And Maverick Bourque, who's a highly touted prospect, who was the AHL MVP this past season, he's going to be a full-time NHL player, along with Logan Stankov. And so those guys are going to be elevated into some bigger roles. Off the ice, you're obviously missing a huge, huge leader, and he has made such an impact here in Dallas in what was just 5 years. And it's almost hard to believe that Joe ever played anywhere else than Dallas. That's how big of an impact he has. And obviously he had an incredible decade in San Jose. But I think that's just the type of person he is. He comes here, he makes everybody around him better. And you talk about just his ability to help mentor the young players on this team, like the Wyatt Johnston, and it's well documented he was living with him the past few years. And right. The breakout campaign Wyatt Johnston had, you think he's not benefited from having Joe Pavelski around every single day in his ear? Like that is huge. And just the preparation he came to the rink with every day, what was massive. And what a player. I hope he gets into the Hall of Fame. I know some people will knock him for not winning a cup, but he still is a national champion, man. At the NCAA, he's had a heck of a career, and from a 7th round pick to play over 1,000 games to do what he did is pretty special.
New backup goalie in town now. What is your feeling? Does Casey DeSmith make the goaltending depth better, worse, or roughly the same?
I would say roughly the same. It was unfortunate that the Stars were unable to retain Scott Wedgwood, who of course departed for Nashville, but Jim Nill, general manager of the Stars, said it was just a cap casualty, unfortunately, and it really wasn't that much of a raise, $500,000, but that's a lot in the cap era when you talk about trying to add everything else into the pot. So they were unable to sign Wedgwood. What most Stars fans are concerned about is the locker room more than the on-ice tandem. DeSmith has pretty similar numbers to Scott Wedgwood, and I think we'll give Dallas a chance to win on most nights when he's in the pipe, and more importantly, just give Otter some rest time when he needs it. But Otter and Wedgwood had a really, really great relationship. They were so tight, and Wedgwood came into Dallas not wanting to take over the number one job. That wasn't his plan, right? He just wanted to be there for Otter and help him grow. And I think that personality really gelled well. So there could be some lasting effects there with that tandem as Otter and DeSmith sort of grow their relationship. But at the end of the day, it is a business, and I think Otter and Wedgwood both understand that. But it was a loss for the locker room. But I think in terms of play, probably going to be very similar. And if Dallas can outscore some of their problems like they did a year ago, they should be just fine in between the pipes.
So now, the season is still a couple of months away. On paper, at least, is this a better Dallas team than it was a year ago? Are there more concerns facing you? And it sounds like, based on what you're saying, if there are concerns, some of them are chemistry related and locker room related.
Absolutely. It's a great question, Gil, and I feel like I've mulled this over all off season. If we had to compare it to what the Dallas Stars were day one of the season prior, I think you could say it's pretty similar, possibly a slight step back, but nothing of real magnitude. But I think there are some concerns on the back end. You are hoping Matt Dumba is going to slide in and play a top 4 role for you. I don't necessarily have too many concerns about the players of Dumba and Lyubushkin. I think my biggest concerns are they going to thrive in a role where Dallas needs them to play? And that is sort of in the top 4. And if you're banking on that, I think that's a real tough go. And two, I'm thinking about this in the grand scheme of things of the playoffs. And right now, I don't think they are better suited to make a deep playoff run like they were a year ago. The regular season is a different question. I'm trying to leave some of my critiques for November when the play starts to ramp up. But if I have to give my honest opinion, I think they are a step back. I don't think they're as good as they were day one a year ago, but that can change. And I'm happy to be completely wrong if the Stars get off to a hot start. But look, I'm not saying the Stars are cratering and they're going to miss the playoffs. I still think they're going to be comfortable in the top 3 of the Central for the majority of the season. And it should be exciting. And I'm intrigued because there are a lot of question marks, and that almost makes it a little more fun.
Yes, it does. All right. I know you'll have it covered every step of the way. Joey, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find the podcast and where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, you can find us anywhere and everywhere. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We're available on YouTube as well at Locked On Stars. You can follow me at Joey the Jet 19 on Twitter or X, whatever they're calling it these days, as well. And I spew some opinions on there as well. But always a pleasure to be with you, Gil, and thanks for having me on again.
Thank you, Joey. Take care. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. That's going to do it for us today. I want to thank my guests, Rachel Donner of Locked On Flyers, Jay Forster of Locked On Blue Jackets, and Joey Erickson of Locked On Stars for joining me. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of Locked On NHL, and I co-host the Friday show along with Rachel Donner. Everydayers, don't forget, we are here Monday through Friday all year long, covering the biggest stories from around the NHL. So make sure you join us for that. Until then, have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, and thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.